Today is March 26, 2014, and we are interviewing Jack Curry, C-U-R-R-Y, correct?
Yes, sir.
At the Quincy, Illinois courthouse. My name is Dylan Welker, and I'll be the interviewer. Could you state for the recording what branch of service you served in,
The United States Army.
and what dates did you enter and exit the service?
2nd day of February, 1967, Groundhog Day. And I got out on the 22nd of November, 1968. I believe that's the anniversary of JFK's assassination, the 22nd of November. Yeah, okay. That's how I remember it.
Yes, sir. And how old are you today?
68.
68 today. Okay. So where were you stationed at when you went into the service?
Initially, we went through reception at St. Louis reception station and were sent to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And you are issued gear, you take tests, you do little guard duty, fire duty, and it's called 0 week until you get into a basic training company. And there was such a ramp up, such a build up for Vietnam that they loaded us up on the 10th of February on my birthday, 21st birthday, and about 100 of us went to Fort Polk, Louisiana. And that's where I took basic training, was Fort Polk. Excuse me.
Okay.
So, and beyond that, you went with the next station then, or no?
Well,
Mhm.
yeah. After Fort Polk, what type of training did you have at Fort Polk? You said that was basic training, or was that
no, basic
okay?
training, yeah.
Then did you go to AIT,
Yes,
or
sir.
did you? Okay.
Fort
And-
Huachuca,
Do you know
Arizona.
how to spell that?
Huachuca, Fort Huachuca, Arizona. It's south and east of Tucson, about 70 miles, and it's out in the desert. But,
Okay. And what was your duty at that time, or what were you learning?
okay, it was a Signal Corps school
Signal Corps.
to be a radio operator, pack a field radio pack for a lieutenant or a captain in the infantry, in an infantry company is what it amounted to.
Okay, so you ended up in the Army Infantry.
Yes, I did, in an infantry unit in Vietnam, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. And what was your rank?
I was an E4. Well, initially when you went over, you were E3, a private, but I was promoted to E4. And
Right. And I failed to ask before you went in the service. Were you drafted, or did you?
I'm pleased that you asked that. I was a draftee,
Okay.
and there were 5 of us from Adams County in February of '67. 3 of us ended up in Vietnam. One of the guys ended up in Thailand, and the other one stayed here in the States, stateside duty. We stayed in touch over the years. Now 2 of them have passed on. Jinxie's gone and Beckard's gone. Jinxie was from Liberty and Beckard from here in Quincy.
Did you guys end up at the same basic training in
Yes,
Fort Leonard Wood
yes.
and Fort Polk?
That's
and
right.
then from there, when you went to AIT, you separated. I
Separated,
assume? Okay.
but through basic we were together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That's neat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you guys kept in touch since then.
Yeah. Right.
So you grew up in Adams County in Quincy?
North of Quincy in the Minden area,
Okay.
rural Adams County. Yeah.
And you went to school there?
Yes, sir.
Did you like school? How did you do in school?
Well, I had 2 years of college before I went in, and I still had a C average, so I thought before I lose a deferment, I'll just volunteer for the draft. I tell you, would you mind if a lot of this will be explained, right?
Go ahead.
I grew up in a rural area, and my grandparents were the local undertakers. Then my parents took over the business. After high school, am I going too fast, ma'am?
Maybe just a little
A
slower.
little slow. After high school, I went to the nearest state university at Macomb, Illinois. There I lived in the basement of a mortuary and worked part-time for room and board. By 1966, about 2/3 of my high school class had been drafted or enlisted in the Navy, Air Force, or Marines. So since one dad in WW1 and my dad in WW2 and two uncles in Korea, I talked to the draft board and volunteered for the draft to leave by February of '67 and not lay around all winter because they told me it'd be May before they'd get me. Get on with the program. First, Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, but after 0 week there, it was so crowded they put 100 of us on buses and off we went to Fort Polk, Louisiana. Then to Fort Huachuca, Arizona for signal training. Then shipped over to Nam the middle of July of '67, this would have been. My first 3 months were in the 121st Signal Battalion of the 1st Infantry Division, known as the Big Red One. Then a buddy who had worked at the same mortuary in Macomb contacted me and said, put in papers to transfer up to the unit where he was near Da Nang. So when approved to go to GR, that being Graves Registration, the 1st Division said, you stay with us. So in November of '67, I was sent to the Company B of the 1st S&T Battalion and the GR section in that unit. My first day on duty, we received 2 Giants. Giant is a code name for casualty, a deceased person. 2 Giants flown down to Xi'an, that's spelled capital D-I, capital A-N, from Phuc Vinh, spelled capital P-H-U-C, capital V-I-N-H. They were soul brothers who got drunked up, started fighting, and killed each other when playing Dodge City. They were 11 Bravo. 11 Bravo is a code word for leg infantry. And after a long mission, celebrated too much, got into a fight. I remember thinking, my God, not all deaths are KIA in a war zone. In addition to KIA, KRHA, which means killed as a result of hostile action, accidents, natural deaths, and suicides, we occasionally have stupid Wild West shootouts. Thank God that was the first and last I was witness to. Again, I'm repeating here. Giant was our code word for human remains. PEs were personal effects, meaning wallets, all personal items on a casualty. Money, pictures. KRHA, I've already explained. That, and KRHA could be from mortars, rockets, booby traps, landmines, and as not KIA, as in a firefight. That pretty much covers. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you sustain any injuries personally while you were over there?
No, I didn't. I was lucky. I laid low in the bunker when I could. When the rockets and mortars came in, I got down in the bottom. I slept in the bunker most of the time. I didn't take a chance up in the tent and rolling down in. Excuse me.
Did you receive any medals or citations for your service in Vietnam?
Vietnam Service Medal and the Good Conduct Medal, and that's all. I'm not a hero.
Well, I understand. Okay. Some could argue that you are.
No, okay.
How did you get along with your fellow soldiers and officers? You shared a little bit about some of the things you experienced with them, but on a general basis, with some of your officers and other soldiers, how did you get along?
Okay. I was both in the signal unit for 3 months and in the Graves registration section for 9 months. Got along with everybody. In fact, when we came back from Florida in January, stopped through Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and saw a kid that I'd been with 30 years ago. And I hadn't seen him for 30, well, I mean, no, I've been with him, 48 years ago, 47, 48 years ago, but I hadn't seen him for 30 years. That's what I want to say.
You were in Vietnam with him?
Yeah. He runs a funeral home in Murfreesboro. His family does. But
Did you keep a diary of any kind while you were over there, or write letters back?
I wrote letters back, but we didn't keep many of them, no.
Did you have a girlfriend before you left?
Yes, I did.
Did you see her after the war?
Yes, I did.
Did you marry her?
Yes, I did. Before the war. What
Yeah.
on that non-business card, what's it say there? 6th of July of 67, I think.
Yes, sir. That's very good. Your wife will be proud.
Oh, yeah, you think so? Listen to that. Oh, okay.
Can you tell me most memorable experiences about your service? Great time you had one time, or the other side of that too?
A greatest experience was in the first week in March of '68, meeting my wife on R&R. I'll sidetrack here. GIs, those rascally GIs, some of them call it I&I, in Hawaii after been over there 8 months, and we had. You don't want me to tell you what I&I is, do you, ma'am? R&R is for rest and recuperation. I&I is for intoxication and intercourse. Okay, I said it. Okay, but leave it to a
Beautiful
GI.
Hawaii vacation
Yeah,
type experience. I
Okay,
understand.
yeah.
So you're able to stay in touch with your wife and the
Yeah.
rest of your family.
Right, but not, of course, not like young folks have been able today in this century with that and with cell phones. I mean, you'd write a letter and it'd take a week roughly for a letter from Vietnam to get to a post office here in the States, and the same the other way, a week or a little more in those days. And that was it.
Be careful about what you talked about in your letters and stuff like that, I'm sure.
Yeah, they weren't. It wasn't like World War II.
Yeah.
There wasn't. Your letters that I'm aware of were not pulled and scouted for any sensitive material. But yeah.
Did you have any type of a good luck charm or something that you carried with you at all times from a family member, your wife?
Yeah, it seems like it did. A lock of her hair, I believe. You put me on the spot there. I'm a little bit ashamed that I didn't remember that. Yeah, I think that's what it was.
That's great. Do you, what type of food did you eat while you were over there?
Being in the base camp most of the time as a support soldier, we were able to get one hot meal a day at a mess hall in a base camp. Whereas those infantry units in armor and those boys out in the field, they had C rations about all the time. But so we got one hot one a day usually, and then C's worked into
MCs.
C rations.
Oh.
Yeah, season.
What did the C rations consist of?
Well, they were canned. Now they don't have. They have what they call MREs, I believe, today, and they're more of a dried food today. And C rations in those days were more canned food. Like you could get the fruit cocktail and peaches and pears. Wasn't bad. And then they had little cans of meat, mystery meat, and I didn't eat much of that. But anyway, and they had dried stuff, biscuits and crackers and things like that in there too.
Did you have a lot of contact with the local Vietnamese people?
On a limited basis, you would have Vietnamese civilians that were approved by, I don't know who, the MPs or somebody, to come in and work in the base camp to help with menial tasks like building bunkers and doing laundry and things like that for the soldiers. But and you'd visit with them some if you were filling sandbags and working with them there. But that's about all.
You didn't venture out to whenever you got leave or
Yeah.
time off,
Yeah.
which I assume was very little.
Yeah.
But you didn't go into the city, you didn't go into Da Nang or Saigon, and did you have any time like that while you were in Vietnam?
Not leisure times as such, but, okay, when we were stationed at the first division had three main base camps. Zion was about 10 miles north of Saigon, and Lai Khe, spelled Lai, capital Khe, Lai was about 30 miles north of Saigon, and Quan Loi, spelled capital Quan, capital Loi, is about 60 miles north of Saigon, and only about 5 miles from the Cambodian border. Excuse me. But the period of time that I was at Zion, we would take our giants from there by an old ambulance, take them into the mortuary there at Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base. Tan Son Nhut, you want me to help with that?
Yeah.
Capital Tan, capital Son, capital Nhut. And when we'd go into Tan Son Nhut Air Base mortuary, why, you'd take time to stop by the USO Club for a milkshake and other refreshments, and that's about the only time off in country you had. Now, there was one other time. Okay, I'll take it. They did offer a 3-day in-country R&R down at Vung Tau, spelled capital Vung, capital Tau, which is on the South China Sea, and it's a resort on down the Saigon River below Saigon, and they had in-country R&R there, and I went down there once, and myself, and a couple of buddies, a couple of guys in the unit. Excuse me.
Did they have like entertainers there?
They
or-
did. They'd have bands that would come in from, a lot of them from the Philippines and from Taiwan and from all over the Pacific Rim. I mean, not now the big USO show. I got to see Blackwell Welch and all the folks in December of '67 at the Lai Khe base camp, the big Bob Hope show, which was very, very nice. But,
Did you travel anywhere else while you were in the service?
well, when I came back in July of '68, why, my wife and I went down to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I finished out my time down there. The reason I got outed in November of '68, see, a draftee got hit for 2 years, and if you survived that 2 years, so then that you got out on, I would have been on the first day of February of '69. Well, I went back, got a letter from the registrar at WIU Macomb, and to get an early release. If you'd been overseas, you could get up to a 90-day early release. And so came home in November of '68. Yeah.
Remember anything? Did you have any pranksters in your unit? Funny stories that happened?
Probably did. I don't remember any right now, but I had an article here. Bear with me. And you asked a few minutes ago if there's any bad situations that you got into in Graves registration. And of course, I'll stop right here and say that all situations in GR are bad because it's death. And I have had people, longtime friends and acquaintances, over the years, over the last 40 years, you tell them what you did in the Army, and they'll say, "Oh, I never thought about that." They think about the infantry and the artillery and the medics and the supply companies and the signal companies, and they don't think about death. Well, what is war about except death? putting the other guy out of business. We do it to them, and they did it to us. And so that's where Gray's registration comes into the picture. So anyway, with that being said, my DEROS, don't ask me what DERO, date of expected return from overseas. I think that's what that was, capital DEROS, DEROS, was about 15 July, if I remember correctly. But before that date, in the last week of June, we got a call at about 1700 hours one evening from a Special Forces unit west of Xi'an on the Saigon River near Dao Tiang. That's capital DAU, capital TIENG. They had two floaters, though I put floaters in quotes, tied to the bank. Our section NCO told me to take a newbie, that means a new guy in the unit, in our section and head out there. I said, Sarge, I am getting to be a short timer, and by the time we get ready and get there, it will be after 1800 hours. He said, Curry, I got nobody else to go. Be prepared to stay all night with the Special Forces. That's Green Berets. Okay. Snake eaters, those guys. All right. So we got our gear, and out the west gate we went, driving about 5 miles at 20 miles an hour on a dirt road, unescorted. At the river, we were met by a Green Beret major who motioned it down the riverbank. Falcon, that kid's name was capital Faulcon. The newbie in our section and I crawled about 25 feet down the riverbank with 2 body bags. The 2 poor souls were bloated and bleached. The odor would gag a maggot, as my dad used to say. We worked to get them bagged as they had gotten to the skin slip stage of decomposition, and rigor mortis also made it difficult. The tough Green Berets did not lift a finger to help us drag 1 bag at a time up the bank and into our old ambulance. Off we headed to our base camp at about 1900 hours, and the sun was setting fast. When we got to the gate, the MPs were closing it for the night, but we got in. We stunk so bad, we were advised to sleep outside near the ambulance. Nobody wanted us in the hooch. The next morning, we headed into the Air Force Base mortuary. The desk sergeant says, "What you got, Curry?" I told him he better come out to see and smell. He did and said, "Stay here, and I'll get the colonel." So the bird colonel in charge of the Air Force mortuary came down and about blew his stack. "Curry, what do you mean bringing 2 Gook POWs in here?" They did have P on one pant leg and W on the other pant leg. I said, "Sir, a Green Beret major ordered us to bring them to you." Excuse me. He said, "Curry, I'll take care of this mess, but do not ever bring something like this in here again." I said, "Yes, sir. I am short with less than 2 weeks, so it won't be me, as this is my last trip to Saigon." Actually, I started clearing post about 10 July and headed home, assuming I would never return. However, in 1997, 2001, and 2011, I have returned on battlefield tours. Xi'an is now an army base for the communist government and hence off limits to old soldiers. The base camp area at Lai Khe has gone back to rubber trees, and the old airstrip at Quan Loy is still discernible, but scrub brush is trying to grow, even though we poured barrels of diesel fuel and defoliant on it in the 60s to keep the dust down. The French villas are long gone that had belonged to the Michelin Tire Company. Now the rubber trees are owned by the communists. It is a surprisingly quiet and peaceful area. To paraphrase a line from the movie Platoon, "The war is over for me now, but it will always be there." And to one degree or another, all veterans can say the same thing as they try to move on with their lives. That's all I got to say about that.
On your trip back to Vietnam, did you go with a group of soldiers that you were with over there? Same units? Did you go with some of the guys locally?
Good question. I went with the first trip in '97 was with 9 other soldiers from the 1st Infantry Division who had been over there anytime between '66 and 1970 when the division came home, and also with other units, not with my unit. We didn't know each other when we met in Los Angeles in March of '97. In 2001, I went back on my own. I planned it out and had some help from my youngest son on the internet travel arrangements, and went on my own. And in 2011, he went with me because his college roommate was from Hue, that's capital Hue, a coastal city in central Vietnam, and he was invited back over to meet that young man's family and to visit, and so he invited the old man to go along, and I went another time. So all of those were good trips.
Do you think those trips helped you heal a little bit?
It did, and I would advise it for anybody. And you tell other Vietnam veterans that you think they enjoy it and appreciate it, but most of them will say, I wouldn't go if they paid me $100,000. You know, they don't want any part of it. But it is a beautiful country. I noticed that when I was over there in '67 and '68. I thought then, if the bombs weren't dropping and the bullets weren't flying, it's a nice place, a nice area. And I thought when I left, I'd never see it again, but I got to see it again.
Did you have specific memories that came back to you when you went back in '97?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, you see where you were, which would have been then about 67, 77, 30 years prior, and how things had changed and stayed the same. One thing that back in '67, in the late '60s, the road, Route 13, which we call Thunder Road, from Saigon up to An Loc and Quan Loy area, just this side of Cambodia, just south of Cambodia, about 4 or 5 miles, was just a 2-lane dirt road with blown out bridges and gouged out bomb craters, and it took you all day to dodge a convoy in and around all of this and go up there with a convoy. Now it's a 4-lane highway, paved, not a 4-lane highway that we're used to by Western standards, but still a smooth 4-lane highway. Big difference, big difference. Oh, mercy. War is a bad thing. There's no doubt about it. It tears things up.
You touched on the use of defoliants.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit more? How you use them, where you use them, why you use them?
We used them around the edges of the base camp to keep brush down, and because for the wire, the concertina wire that you'd stretch around on a perimeter where friendly forces were inside this wire, and outside was free fire zone, and that's why. So you could see the concertina wire and see any enemy, Viet Cong, trying to get through there maybe at night.
Can you explain the wire to me a little bit?
Concertina?
Uh-huh.
I believe I'd have to look that up, whether that's a French word. It's a rule. spiraled like wire with burrs on it. It's like barbed wire. Put barbs on it. Yeah. And then they spiral it and we lay it out around a base camp or a fighting position.
More or less fencing.
Yeah, fencing. Yeah, excuse me.
Yeah. But and so that would be dirt area that it laid on then, because
Yeah,
you had
yeah.
defoliated the whole
Right,
area with
right.
Agent Orange or dioxin, whatever.
Right.
Okay, you've already touched on when you left, but the day you left service, where were you? Who were you with? Do you remember being actually discharged, a medical exam that you might have had?
This would have been, you mean when I was down at Fort Bragg, North Carolina?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the last week when you know you're going to be ready for discharge, um, you're doing paperwork and turning things in, and yeah, you go to the medics and they check you over, and you go to the dentist and that's.
Did you see your wife?
Oh yes, well she was down there with, yeah, we were off post. We rented a trailer off post, and yeah, she was.
The day you came back from Vietnam?
Hmm.
Do you remember that day when
Yes.
you landed?
Yes. Yeah, it came back through Travis Air Force Base in California and went to Oakland Army Terminal and got new uniforms and fly from San Francisco International Airport back to St. Louis, and my family, my parents and my wife met me down there, yeah, at Lambert Field. It's far different than today. Back then, you'd walk down the stairway and you could get off and kiss the ground. Now you got to go through the terminal, and your family can't come right out to greet you at the side of the airplane. But that's the way things have gone.
Any other reactions from people when you came back from Vietnam, or do you remember anything?
A lot of the people talk about being spit on or cussed at, and I never had experienced that per se. No, there weren't any big welcome home parties. My family, we settled in, and I can remember it when I came home from Vietnam. We were in the backyard, Minden, having a family picnic. Been back about a week, and it was the middle of July, and some kids still had some 4th of July firecrackers. Neighbor kids over here, 100, 200 feet away. And they started setting them up, and I was under that picnic table, like this table here, in a heartbeat. It's just a common reaction. You just were programmed to do that. And but I eventually got over that.
Things like that bother you today at all?
No.
Helicopters or your
No.
Yeah.
Well, the old Huey Slick, it had a familiar whoop, whoop, whoop noise. And once in a while, when you see that at an air show or something, and it brings back memories. But the new Blackhawks, the new generation of helicopters, they don't make that noise like the old Huey did. But yeah.
What did you do then the days following your release from service? You start a new career, you join the reserves. What was your plan of action post-service?
We went back to school at Macomb, and I graduated there with a bachelor's degree in history, and I got into the reserves, Army reserves, for some pocket change besides the GI Bill. Excuse me. And after I graduated from there in May of 1970, I went down to Carbondale, SIU Carbondale, to mortuary school for a year. And that's where I got commissioned. I was in the reserves, and they said they needed young second lieutenants, and so I took a commission as a lieutenant in the reserves. And after a year of that, in the early 70s, I dropped out of the reserves. I was back in business that my folks had in the Ursa Mendon, Lorain area, mortuary business, and we worked together and for years. And when I was 41 years old, I went back into the Army National Guard and finished out a total of 23 years total time, active and reserve. But so
you got retired
yeah,
officially.
I got retirement from the military reserves and some benefits, and I enjoyed that experience in the Army Guard. Got to do a lot of traveling around this country and overseas over the years.
What was your rank when you were discharged from the Guard?
Second lieutenant, because you get your highest rank. Even if you were a first sergeant, you still get your highest rank, so you're second lieutenant. Oh, well, that's the way the world is.
You said you got to travel quite a bit with the Guard. Where did you end up in the Guard, overseas wise?
Oh, about 5 times I went to Germany with the Army Guard on different missions and schools, and once to Korea and once to Panama before we gave Panama Canal Zone away back in, what would have been, 93, I think I went to Panama. And yeah, and then all over the United States, different places.
When you went to Korea, were you close to the DMZ?
No, we weren't, and I didn't get to see the DMZ. I was only over there 3 weeks, but didn't get up to that area.
What year would that have been?
I would have been in, it was the spring of 2001.
Okay.
Yeah, it was 2000.
And you went to Germany as well?
Right.
Were you close to Berlin? Did you see?
Never got up to Berlin.
Yeah.
No, I can't name those 2 bases offhand. I'd think of them at midnight, or I'd have to look at a map, but 2 military bases where the Illinois Army Guard and other states have rotations over there to train.
So you did 3 weeks a year in the Guard?
Well, yeah, at least 3 weeks. Sometimes, I mean, they'd come and say, Curry, you want to go to 2 weeks to Corpus Christi Navy base with a Chicago unit. They need extra people, and you go. And there's all kinds of travel opportunities if you're open to that. And or a 6-month school at Fort Gordon, Georgia, I went to in '99 and 2000. Excuse me. Electronics school. And that type of training.
Do you attend any reunions with the 101st or the?
Excuse me, it wasn't the 101st. It was the 1st, the 1st Infantry Division. You got that right now, right?
The big red one?
The big red
Yes,
one.
sir.
Okay. No, that's 2 different units. See. Okay.
Sorry, yes.
We have over the years. The last one that I went to was in St. Louis in 2007, and I don't travel a great distance to those, but I have.
Did you run into some fellows that you knew there?
Yes, I have over and to a couple of the guys that went on the first return trip in 1997 to Vietnam, which was sponsored by the Society of the 1st Infantry Division. That tour was. So I see a couple of them.
Did you join any service organizations?
Yes, I'm a longtime member of the Bear Creek Post, American Legion in the Ursa, Mendon, Lorain area. Post 823. I'm a life member of AMVETS Post 76 at Ursa, and a life member at Post 5410, the VFW at Camp Point, Illinois.
How would you say that the service and the guard duty and your time in the military affected your life?
Wow. Excuse me. Well, it did definitely affect your life as you look back, and some good and some bad. I wouldn't trade any of it though. Um, for instance, one example. When I was a senior in high school, I put in to go to the Air Force Academy. That was a big thing in the mid-60s, was to go to Colorado Springs to the Air Force Academy. And the competition was big time, and to get into it. And I didn't make the grade. I just went off to school at the State University. But I often think if I would have made it into the Air Force Academy or West Point or Annapolis, I wouldn't have graduated till 1968. But I would have missed out on the Tet Offensive of February and March of 1968 as a young enlisted man on the battlefield. And you've heard of the Tet Offensive.
Yes, sir.
You know a little bit of some of the history of that. And that was quite an experience, all of the death and destruction. So, I don't know, that's just the way things were for me.
You've pretty much talked about how the war experience affected you and what your opinions about war are. I think I understand that pretty good, okay? Would you encourage young men and women to enlist today?
Well, yes, somebody's got to keep carrying the ball, which brings up a point. I would hope that future generations understand what the draft was. Today, a young person has an option. They can come get out of school, high school, go to college, go into business or industry. If they live in a rural area, they can go into farming, or they can go to the military service. That's an option. But up until 1973, when the draft was taken away, I mean, we still have the selective service system. I guess young 18-year-olds still are supposed to sign up, but for all practical purposes, the Vietnam War destroyed the draft. But up through the 60s and through Vietnam, it was not an option. It was an obligation. And I have always had a strong feeling about that young people maybe some way owe something to this country in the way of civilian service. I don't know what the answer is. I won't argue about it with anybody, but there's good points and bad points to the draft. And it's gone.
Yes, some may say that there should be a mandatory service.
Yeah,
I think that Israel is one country that I can think of that has 2 years mandatory for everybody.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Would be interesting. Is your view of government the same before and after your service?
My view of government.
Your government per se, or government in general?
Well, I guess my hope springs eternal, and you always hope that things will be a better day and be on the up and level. But yeah, I don't know. We've had problems over the years, but still, at the end of the day, what future generations have always got to realize, we still got the best thing going. If you've traveled overseas at all and seen some of the problems in the world overseas, and you realize that the United States, our way of life and our land is super, just great compared to the rest of the world. I'm at a loss of words for you.
It's all right. You're talking about the freedoms that we enjoy as a result
right,
of
that's
your
right.
service
It's
and others. How do you feel about how war is depicted in the movies? You talked a little bit about Platoon,
mm,
probably one of the I've heard one of the closest resemblances to what the war in Vietnam was like. Do you feel that way in movies in general? Do you think that they depict war in the right light, or
well, I've seen Platoon, and I've seen Hamburger Hill, and Full Metal Jacket, and seems like a couple others. And but beyond that, I've kind of given up on the movies. I guess for one reason, at my age, I go into a movie theater and end up falling asleep. So I waste my money. So I don't watch them.
they're expensive these days?
Yeah,
It's ridiculous.
yeah. Excuse me.
Do you have an opinion about how war and history is taught in school today?
No, because I'm removed from education far enough. Our kids are out of high school, and I got two grandkids about 3 and 5 years old, and so it'll go to a parochial school, I know, and I'm just not up to date on what a lot of the history teachers are doing now. I don't,
What's the most positive thing that you can take away from your time in the military?
I have liked to travel and just see other places and people and part of their culture has been interesting.
Sounds like you got a lot of education, training
Well,
through your guard duty as well.
some, yeah. I had 6 months electronic school in Fort Gordon. I had 4 months of chemical warfare school at Fort McClellan, Alabama, back in, that's been 20 years ago, 1993. And and then other shorter courses. But,
What would you say is the most negative thing you've taken from the service?
Just, I guess, man's inhumanity to man in some instances. What war is about at the end of the day. It shouldn't have to be. It's just it's a sad situation. And as I tried to say here to you a little bit ago, without going, I mean, it's fine when Johnny comes marching home and he's all well and good, or even if I got a friend up here near Warsaw that got drafted into the Marines and lost an arm in Vietnam in 1967. And but then they also come home in boxes with flag covered aluminum shipping cases. And that's sad. That's really sad.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about today?
No, I think we've covered, and I've rambled probably too much.
It's quite all right. That's what we like to hear.
Well,
Your opinions and stories, and
I
you've shared greatly with us.
I just hope again that future generations understand when they hear stories about uncles and fathers and grandparents that it was a draft obligation. And the other thing was I got to explain graves registration. And somebody's got to take care of the dead on the battlefield. And anyway, that's a sad part of the program of life. And I'm about to wear this young lady out.
I've enjoyed listening.
Well, thank you for your service.
Okay, thank you. Well, it was an interesting experience as I start to look back at life, and I am active working in some rural cemeteries, trying to preserve where my ancestors are buried, and get out there with a chainsaw and brush cutters, and keeps me young and keeps me limber, and that's all. Yep. Are we done? I'll be quiet.
Are you retired today, sir?
Yes, I am.
And you retired as a mortician
Yes.
from your family business?
We sold the business in 1987. For various reasons, and I was still in my 40s, and I went back in the Army Guard, and for some income, I worked construction. I did a lot of substitute school teaching as a substitute school teacher, and I drove a truck over the road for a short time. Couldn't handle it, and couldn't stay awake. But anyway, but we are completely retired now. Yeah. Oh, I drove a school bus too. Besides substitute school teaching, drove a school bus for many years, and so that's all.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.